Before we get started, we just want to say a few words about the recent events in America. We understand that podcasts and Disney films are often both forms of escape from the horrors of the real world, but considering that The Lion King deals with themes like the authoritarian rise to power and the ignorance of good men, we felt it necessary to preface this episode with a statement, as these events unfolded after our original recording of this episode. The attack on our nation's capital was one of terrorism, point blank. Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, their like-minded and silent Republican cohorts, and conservative media have radicalized an alarmingly high number of American citizens and have propagated this movement to undermine our democracy, seemingly to no end. Our elected officials have every responsibility to impeach and remove Trump and his ilk from our government in order to protect the democracy we have held so dear for the last 244 years. We know our platform is small, but as it continues to grow, we want every single one of our listeners to know that fascism, authoritarianism, and bigotry will not be tolerated by us or our team, and we will continue to use whatever platform we have to speak out against it, and to call for the perpetrators of these heinous acts to be brought to justice.
Well, hello there. Welcome to Defining Disney, where we seek the answer to the ultimate question: what is the best Disney animated movie? I'm your host, Nicole, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Caroline.
Hey there!
Our goal today is to use an objective rubric with scoring broken down to single points to score and rank each movie in Disney's animated canon and bring our findings to you. Today, we are going to be jumping off Season 2 with The Lion King, the unforgettable tale of the great circle of life and the lessons learned by a young lion as he battles with his own destiny. If you haven't seen The Lion King, we highly recommend you stop now. We love having you, but there are about to be some major spoilers discussed in depth. We're not entirely sure how it's possible you've never seen this movie. It's The Lion King. But if somehow you haven't, please load up Disney Plus right now, watch it, and then come back to us. We'll be here. Now, the main content of our podcast is the introduction of 8 main categories that we'll be talking about. This is going to include story, music, character development, theming, cinematography, popularity, impact on Hollywood, and then our ever-favorite category, quotability. Let's go ahead and start with our overall story category, where we look at the sub-criterion such as a clear beginning, middle, end, and climax, our protagonist versus antagonist structure, the role of dialogue in story development, and then, of course, the overall feels factor. And when we're looking at the story structure for this movie for a beginning through end, it was very clear to us where those breaks were in this story, because the beginning is iconic. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Circle of Life is probably one of the most well-known scenes in cinematic history. So what an intro.
Absolutely. And then the beginning really goes up until the stampede, because you're still getting all that introduction of characters and the world and the different relationships between the characters. So you get a lot in the beginning, I think. Probably more than several other movies we've discussed.
Yeah, I would say that the beginning is pretty long for this movie, because we get our introduction of all the main characters, we get our main conflict right off the bat, we get our main villain and their plot. And then we also get the major plot point to the death of Mufasa and Simba leaving the Pride Land. So the beginning really is long and has a lot of content. And that's because the middle is from the point where Simba leads the Pride Lands to when he comes back.
Yeah, that whole interlude is the middle. I found some really cool symbolism in some of the lines. Scar says, run away and never return. And Simba does. He runs away and he intends to never come back. He runs until he can't run anymore and he collapses in the middle of the desert. And then as he's heading back to the Pride Lands, Rafiki says, the king has returned.
Yeah, we get a lot of really great moments in the actual dialogue in this movie, and that really was the easiest way for us to symbolize that was the end of the middle. And then when we're moving into the climax, it's Simba returning to the Pride Lands to restore balance and to bring order and healing back to his home. And that is, all encompassed by the plan to take back the Pride Lands from Scar and the hyenas, that whole conflict, and then the ultimate resolution with Scar being consumed by the fire and the hyenas that he ultimately was trying to throw under the bus for his dastardly plan. And then our end is going to be the reunification of Simba with Sarabi, his mother, and Nala, that big roar at the end, and the Pride Lands healing and returning back to their natural order.
Yes. And I think it's important to note that even though the story structure here is very clear, I wouldn't say it's necessarily simple. We do get a lot of content, and it's not in the traditional shorter beginning, lots of rising action in the middle, climax, falling action to an end. It's not quite built traditionally that way, but it's still very easy to tell where each part of the story is, and it all makes sense altogether.
Correct. The beginning has its own miniature climax within it, and that is kind of what we would look at as like an act 1, and then the middle of this is more like an act 2, and then act 3 is the actual culmination of the previous acts into that finale. So it is definitely a different story structure than what we see from other animated films that even we've reviewed in all of season 1. Now, one thing that this film does very well, if you were a little confused by the story or don't believe that it's the clearest story structure, is we have a very clear protagonist and antagonist in this film.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it doesn't get much better than Scar. He's immediately introduced following the title card, and his character design screams villain, as does his dialogue. Like, there's no mistaking him for anyone else.
Yeah, and it starts off right away. It comes on strong at the very beginning and does not let up any time that you see him on the screen, which is an easy way to indicate that he is our antagonist of the film. Not just because, spoiler alert, he kills Mufasa, but it is because of all of his mannerisms, of his dialogue, of his conflict that he has with his brother, his sarcasm and dry humor. All of it is indicative of a true antagonist. And we also get, also his antagonistic capabilities aren't just with those non-actionable items. His entire MO is going to be fratricide / regicide, Reggie Who, manipulation, attempted murder of his nephew, starving the Pride Lands. All of it is bad.
Yeah.
Scar bad. That's the easiest equation ever in the history of ever.
Scar equal bad. His greed and his thirst for power literally know no bounds. There is no lengths he will not go to seek more for himself.
Yeah, and it's all in the name of getting his rightful place as king. And that's all he sees, and he's going to do whatever it takes to get there. Killing his own brother was just part of the plan. It was a means to an end.
And it was just the beginning. He wanted his nephew dead too, and then when he thought he might be able to salvage something at the end, he threw the hyenas under the bus, and it was never about anyone else except for him.
Yes, a story of me. And that's it. And when we're talking about, clear story structure, overall story points, we do like talking about that effectiveness of dialogue in the overall story development. And I think that after the title card, after Circle of Life, after you feel really positive, you do have that initial confrontation between Scar and Mufasa. And you can see that clear conflict at the very beginning, because you see Scar very jealous of Simba and recognizing that because Simba is around, he's no longer next in line. And that bothers Scar a lot.
To put it mildly. I think also you get shortly thereafter, Mufasa and Simba are in the savannah practicing their pouncing. And Mufasa takes Simba out and he says, everything the light touches, one day will be yours, sort of in showing him the kingdom. And Simba goes, what's that shadowy place over there? You must never go there. And that sets up the whole next sequence, because when you tell a little kid they can't do something, they want to do it real bad now. And so Simba immediately goes after that, wants to take Nala there. They trick Zazu into going there, and then that kind of snowballs into the whole thing with the hyenas and Mufasa and Scar.
Yeah, it's very strong. Those moments that Mufasa has with Simba are very strong because the dialogue really sets up what's going to happen next. There's always like this feeling of foresight or foreshadowing whenever Simba and Mufasa have those conversations together, which is really nice. And then I think that, moving on in story development in dialogue, when we're in that middle of the story and Simba is learning a new way of life with Timon and Pumbaa, learning the concept of Hakuna Matata is completely different. It's a total 180 from what he had when he was in the Pride Lands, because Hakuna Matata means no worries, which means you don't have to worry about life or what's going on. It's very go with the flow, fly by the seat of your pants kind of mentality. And in his previous world, he had the weight of his kingdom on his shoulders. And being able to slough that away and embrace Hakuna Matata is why he has that struggle when Nala confronts him about going back.
Yeah, it serves as that escape for him and changes his whole mindset. And we see him live that way, thanks to a montage, for probably a decade.
Yeah, I don't know how long Lion Adolescence is, but as long as Lion Adolescence is, at the very least, we have him embracing a completely different mentality. One other note that I would like to make here is that Rafiki acts as a kind of a narrator towards the beginning, and Rafiki acts as more of a shaman or a person that's well revered, has wisdom, and he's part of the actual story and kind of narrates because he kind of can foresee what Simba's future holds for him. But he kind of also acts as that conscience for the pride. And again, it reminds me of more of a character that's revered as, someone who is wise, who is someone that can be consulted, someone who can be entrusted. But Rafiki kind of serves two roles in this film.
Yes, and I think particularly with the narrator role that he serves, a lot of those moments, rather than with traditional narration, as we've discussed with previous films, it cuts to Rafiki and he says almost nothing, but the little verbalizing that he does do and his actions and his drawings on his tree serve more as narration than anything else. And it's effective. You understand what's happening.
Yeah, it's definitely a different role than we see with a lot of different films. And I think that Rafiki is done very well. It's just very different for the story development overall.
Definitely.
Now, one thing that we can all agree on is that this movie has loads of feels factor.
Oh,
good, bad, and otherwise.
Just to get the elephant out of the room, Mufasa's freaking death. Like, I know Disney is known for the trope of killing the parent, but this one takes the cake for me.
I mean, Disney, did you have to go that hard? Did you have to go that hard?
They went hard, man.
Yeah, as a 90s kid, that's one of the most devastating scenes in cinematic history for me. And I know that it's pretty emotional for a lot of people. So I think that Disney really did their homework on this one. And I don't know, did they happen to put that in like test audiences and be like, how sad can we make this?
If they did, they must have been pretty sad.
Ooh. Tears. Almost every time.
Yeah, same.
Tears. Dad, wake up. Oh my God. No, please don't do this to me.
Now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some of the happier emotions. The whole Hakuna Matata sequence is fraught with joy, and happiness and that feeling of relaxation. And I think we all could use a little bit more of that in our lives.
Yeah, Hakuna Matata is something that I should have probably embraced in 2020 a little bit more. With how stressful things could be, trying to say no worries in 2020 was not the easiest thing to do, but you could definitely see that being able to embrace that did relieve a whole lot of that stress and tension, and they were able to live their lives the way that they wanted to on their own schedule. And no, they didn't report to anybody. They didn't have deadlines, and they didn't have a schedule. None of that.
Responsibilities. Then you also have the Simba and Nala romance, which is very subtly done at first, and then when they grow up, it kind of hits you like a truck. I mean, Can You Feel the Love Tonight does not leave anything to question.
No, and I also love that there is that buildup, because you can have, and a lot of relationships start as that. They start as friendships, and you build that organically, and for them, it was basically their entire lives growing up together. You know, there was that pause in between where we see the Hakuna Matata montage, but it's not like those feelings for each other went away. And I like that it was like riding a bike. You just pick up where you left off, and you see how much they cared about each other as individuals, and then recognizing it, that it was something a little bit more.
Yeah, that tussle sequence is very much picking back up right where they left off. I do like that a lot. And then you also get just so much, in the final battle, there's so many emotions. You get the guilt is palpable from Simba because he's blamed himself all these years for Mufasa's death. And then when Scar finally confesses and then Simba makes him repeat it to everyone else, the vindication and the triumph there as Simba begins to win the battle and, you know, take back his rightful place. You're just rooting for him the whole time.
Yeah, the entire climax is actually a really interesting way to mess with the feels factor, because you know what the stakes are. And you have that buildup of Simba coming back and the plan to get Scar out and to defeat the hyenas. But Disney also was very smart of using their comedic relief, which was Timon and Pumbaa, and that was well established throughout the entire second act, and interspersing that within certain parts of freeing Zazu. Are you talking to me? They call me Mr. Pig. Having that within the actual climax and that conflict to make sure that audiences weren't so overloaded with that tension and that conflict between Simba and Scar, because there's a lot going on there. I like that they were able to put in bits and pieces of that comedic relief, you know, even if it's just the hula and, you know, there's as the distraction. It's wonderful. And I like that they were able to lean in on that comedic relief so it wasn't 110% throughout that entire climax.
And I think a lot of that, we have to give credit to Nathan Lane and Art Isabella, because they just bring so much levity and hilarity to those roles.
Geniuses. They are geniuses, and they are some of the best comedic relief that you'll see
in the entire Disney canon.
Easily in this canon, possibly on the screen in general.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And with all that being said, overall story gets a whopping 23.25 out of 25. Moving into our music category, we are going to be looking at 4 main sub-criterion, which is going to be difficulty and complexity, memorability, story advancement, and character development. So moving into difficulty and complexity, I think that there is a lot to be said about the influence that they were able to bring into the music from African culture, specifically the Zulu and the Swahili. Being able to bring in that influence, especially for Western audiences, is going to introduce a certain level of difficulty and complexity that's not familiar to Western audiences, at least.
I agree. And I think working with African artists in order to make sure that those influences were right and authentic was so important for Disney to do to bring this story to life.
Correct. There's a fine line between authenticity and appropriation, and they did a very good job with consulting the right people to make sure that it was more authentic sounding.
Diving specifically into Circle of Life, other than the Zulu lyrics that you get there, you also just have so many different pieces and parts moving throughout that piece. You have so many different harmonies and vocalizations on so many different levels of different kinds at any given point in the song. And I think that is such a strength of Circle of Life as an opening.
Yes, and one thing that I will talk about definitely later in the continued usage and subjective, when we do get into talking about the Broadway cast recording of this, they lean into it even more. So you can really listen to that and get it on even a deeper scale of how much difficulty and complexity was even in the original before they put it onto Broadway. So there is more to come on that. Now, I think if we move into memorability, I don't think anybody is going to question why we gave full marks in this memorability subcategory, because if you don't know at least one song from this film, I think you're lying to me or living under a rock. Please come out. Thank you for finding our podcast, but you need to go watch Lion King because yikes. But I think that everybody knows something from this film. And if you don't know one song, you might know several songs or all of them forwards and backwards, like me.
Raise your hand if you're...
I am in this statement, and
I am in this statement, and
I'm comfortable.
I mean, I'm okay with it, yeah. I think the other thing could be that there are people who know these songs that don't necessarily link them to this movie, which, like, that in itself is sad. Please watch the movie and find where the songs came from. But, like, Elton John also recorded most of these songs as pop songs and released them on the radio. And so that in turn contributed to the memorability and the lasting power of these songs, and that a great like Elton John, who worked on the music for the film, also recorded all of these songs and put them out there with his name on it and said, hey, there's a pop version of this. So you know, if you don't want to go see the movie, if you're not into the animation thing, which like, why not? But okay, to each their own, I suppose. But there are people out there who know, oh yeah, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? That's an Elton John song. Yes, but it's from this movie.
I think that there's even an argument to be made that if you've seen this movie, you even know some of the non-lyrical music, like To Die For, which is also known as the Stampede song. Everybody who has seen this movie remembers the Stampede song because of that feels factor that we were talking about previously. And you can see in your mind what was going on in front of you when that happened. And that's the key to a really great soundtrack, lyrics and sound.
Absolutely. And then there has to be an argument made here for Be Prepared. I think, and it's a toss-up for me between a couple, but it is in the argument for best Disney villain song ever, for several reasons.
I can comfortably say this is in my top 3, but if you were to ask me to order my top 3, I would find plenty of reasons why I shouldn't do that for you, rather than actually put them in top 3 order, but this is definitely one of them.
Absolutely. The juxtaposition of the intensity of emotion that Scar and Jeremy Irons as Scar brings to the table, and the intelligence and specificity of the lyrics is just so powerful and intimidating. You really get that grit and growl that makes him sound like a lion, but also makes him sound like a villain.
It's so good. I think an evil lion, like, how are we supposed to say that he's not one of the most iconic villains of all time and have one of the most iconic villain songs of all time? It's an evil lion.
Right?
And then also for memorable score segments, This Land and King of Pride Rock, if you hear them, you'll automatically know where that falls into the film, and you'll feel the same feelings that you had when you watched the film, the triumph, the sadness, the everything. So, yeah, memorability, full points. Come on.
A+.
A+. And then let's go ahead and talk about story advancement, because I think there's also a couple notable pieces here as well.
Definitely. I mean, we get this throughout the Renaissance, but Lion King really heavily leans into that Broadway concept of story breaking into song at the most powerful moments. You get that with everything from Circle of Life all the way through Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Like, it's all there. Also, I just can't wait to be king is a great one for this because Simba and Zazu have been like sniping at each other for a hot second. And Simba's like, you know what? This is how it's gonna be. And he breaks out into song. And Zazu cannot get a word in edgewise.
Because it's song. Zazu's got to get on the singing platform. Come on, Zazu, I believe in you. And then also, it's really important to note that if you do know the musical piece called This Land, that's not just Simba's theme or Simba's motif, but it's really that theme for the idea of destiny overall. And Simba and destiny are very closely related in this movie because obviously this movie is about Simba's destiny, but it is in motifs standing, it's not just used for Simba, it is used for the destiny of your place in the great circle of life, which is beautiful.
Yeah, it reappears, and that motif reappears in several different soundtrack numbers as different things are changing Simba's destiny. And then This Land breaks out into full force with it as he's returning to the Pride Lands. And it's wonderful and beautiful, and I just have to like close my eyes and enjoy the majesty every time I listen to it because it's so good.
It's so good. And then finally, how it advances character development with the movie, with the music involved. I am going to step on my soapbox for this one because Be Prepared is the perfect personification of character development in a song. You know, we talk about heroes always have their I want song, you know, princesses in Disney films always have their, you know, want song, and villains always have their bad song. The thing with Be Prepared and Scar is that it really does show how far Scar is willing to go for power, because they do talk about killing off Mufasa and also killing off Simba, and then also how he's using the hyenas in order to take over as king of Pride Rock, because this is not just a Scar is going to, you know, accept his place as second in line, but he's going to be upending the entire balance with a full coup d'etat of sorts. And that is shown by all of the authoritarian imagery that we get in Be Prepared specifically. The hyenas are all goose stepping in front of Scar at one point in Be Prepared. That is very much an authoritarian display of power. And the homage and the pomp and circumstance that goes around with great displays of the military are all very common authoritarian themes. So, you know, our who's who of 20th century dictators, Mussolini, Stalin, Hitler, all of those, the Kims in North Korea, we're used to seeing these types of displays of power. And then if that wasn't enough for you, when Scar is rising to the skies, there is the moon behind him, which is just like a sickle from Stalin era communism. So if you weren't picking up on it, the guy is a jerk, and he's doing whatever he can to completely upend his entire government system in the Pride Lands. So there was a whole lot of not so subtle imagery for you for this character development of Scar.
And now I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit and talk about King of Pride Rock. So this is the score number that rides beneath the climax, that final sequence of Simba returning to Pride Rock and fighting Scar and that ensuing battle. And it juxtaposes parts of This Land, which is Simba's theme and that theme of destiny, and has these beautiful soaring vocals and melody with Scar's instrumentation. There's a clarinet and there's strings, and they have different variations on that same little leitmotif. It feels very underhanded and very tricksy, as Scar is, and you get this back and forth in conversation between these two themes and these two instrumentation groups as Scar and Simba are circling each other and going after each other and trading places in terms of who is winning the fight. And it is a perfect musical representation of what is going on screen. And you can see in your mind's eye every single moment of that scene as you listen to this song.
Yeah, there are a couple of very strong moments of character development in this movie. This is one of those where we would strongly, strongly recommend that you just listen to the soundtrack and come back to us and see if you're able to hear some of those same things, because it's all over the place. You just have to be listening.
Indeed.
So for music overall, we did decide to give Lion King 17.75 out of 20. Let's move into our character development category, which is going to cover the range of characters and then the growth from those characters. And again, I think Lion King does very well in the range category.
I totally agree. I mean, you get so much out of Simba and Scar on both sides of that coin, and you also get a fair amount out of Nala, I think.
Agree. I think for our range characters, we see a lot of range from Scar, especially right after that opening card. And you get the whole why behind his dastardliness. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that, because we don't always get the best backstories for our villains, and we don't always get a fully developed why from them. So I think that getting that for Scar is a really nice breath of fresh air. And then obviously the whole movie revolves around Simba. So we do get plenty of range from him, you know, from being a child all the way through taking his place as King of Pride Rock. And then for Nala, of course, even though she doesn't get as much screen time, we do get the reality that she is Simba's betrothed. And she will be taking place as basically second in command when Simba takes over as the king of the Pride Land. So I like that you get that backstory for her, and then how much she advocates for Simba to go back and take his rightful place.
Definitely. I think that's one of her strongest moments, is when she stands up to him and she says, you can't just sit here and ignore your responsibilities. Like, you have to go back. And he hates to hear it, but, like, she's right.
Oh, yeah. We love when our female characters are right. And then moving into our moderately or medium developed characters, I think that a lot of the characters that we run into in the rest of this film fall into this category. You obviously have Timon and Pumbaa here, Mufasa, and Zazu.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Timon and Pumbaa get a lot. Definitely Timon more than Pumbaa, I feel like. We get a little bit of, like, when he was a young warthog, but also we get a few more emotions, I think, out of Timon.
You get a little bit more, but I think that's because Timon is a little bit more animated and big as a character himself.
That's fair.
Rather than Pumbaa. Pumbaa is even more laid back than Timon, if that was possible. And, you know, he's a lot more go with the flow, and he's not that dominating personality like Timon is. So I think that when it comes to personality and range, I think it's a lot more equal, but Timon is more of the standout just because of the type of character that he is. And then obviously Mufasa and Zazu were in that medium developed category because Mufasa is the king of the Pride Lands. So you have that level of authority, you have that level of respect, you see how he interacts, especially with his son, but, you know, taking the morning report from Zazu, keeping peace, figuring out what's going on, and then even after his death in the gorge, coming back to Simba and saying, hey, remember who you are. You know, being that voice of reason and that push in the right direction to remember somebody's destiny. You get really nice range there. And then, I mean, Zazu is the sidekick throughout the whole thing, acting as that, like, main advisor almost.
Yeah, I think with Mufasa, you continue to get more development out of him after his death because of the role that he plays. Well, the role that his absence plays, really, in not just Simba's life, but in the lives of the entire Pride. And then you get, you know, Zazu as Mufasa's advisor, but then you also get to see him as Scar's captive. And I gotta say, Zazu in captivity is really funny.
Yeah, he gets real snarky and real opinionated, and I like that type of side of Zazu because he's pretty buttoned up, he's pretty, you know, all business when you see him in that first act, but seeing him as the captive advisor in the second act is hysterical.
And then I think as we get into the rest of the characters, we're getting into that more minor territory. Rafiki is kind of the one that sits on that line for me in that he gets some decent screen time. I feel like he plays an important role, but he's so mysterious as a character that we really don't get a whole lot of range out of him.
Yeah, he does kind of move from that narrator to advisor to foreseeing kind of personality. It's kind of all over the place, but he does get a decent amount of screen time and he definitely plays an important role. Making Rafiki, Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed, and Sarabi all quote-unquote minor characters, I think is more related to the screen time that they have and not necessarily the fact that they're underdeveloped, at least in my opinion. You know, we can kind of go in several different directions with Rafiki, but I think that with the hyenas, especially Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed, you do get quite a bit of range from them. You know, you come from starving and trying to take out the little lion cubs out of opportunity, and then they talk about the opportunity of no king, la 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 la. And then when we move into that second act, you know, they say, okay, well, it's dinner time. We ain't got no stinking entree. You know, you start seeing those characters evolve a little bit of maybe this wasn't the greatest idea in the world. So you get that little bit of range there as well. And then Sarabi is always the matriarch. You know, even with the little bit of screen time that she has, you can see her position of power and influence. And you can see how much other members of the Pride revere her. Even after Mufasa's death, she is still seen as that matriarch and basically the main mover and shaker for the lionesses.
Yeah, they basically choose her to lead because they don't trust Scar, and Scar also just sits around and does nothing while the lionesses and the hyenas try to find food. So it kind of makes sense that Sarabi would be the most important because she's the one working the hardest.
Well, and male lions are wont to their laziness, but even so, seeing Sarabi as the leader, even after, you know, Mufasa has died, and you would assume there would be a changing of the guard, there was not that changing of the guard. Mm-hmm. So I like seeing that she still has that range as that influencer. And I mean, even Scar has to rely on her saying, okay, well, where's all the food? And she has to be the one that says, there is no food, dummy. And then I think moving into growth, I think that the main growth obviously is going to be from Simba. You know, we see that entire journey for him, and he ultimately makes that full circle of coming back to his destiny and coming back to who he was meant to be. But we did a whole lot of wandering throughout the lifetime of the story to get there.
Yes, definitely. I mean, he has to go farther away from the situation, I think, and distance himself before he is able to come to that realization of, no, this is what I was meant to do. This is where my duty and my heart lie. And then, in turn, he kind of brings about growth to Timon and Pumbaa. They find a purpose more meaningful than just their little oasis of relaxation and their Hakuna Matata philosophy. They find that fighting for Simba and the friend that they've, you know, helped raise almost is more important to them.
Agreed. And I think that Timon and Pumbaa are seeing the world outside of their home and seeing that bigger picture and finding that fire to fight for something, you know, rather than just kind of taking things day by day, kind of going with the flow. And like, even though that's great, you know, self-care and do live your best life, you do ultimately need to fight for something. You need to stand for something in order to have a real purpose in life, you know, that driving passion.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to bring into the conversation seeing the world outside their little oasis, because Lion King 1.5 ends up like retconning a lot of Timon's story and where he comes from. And that'll be a future bonus episode I would love to do. But
yeah, there's a lot to unpack in the expanded
Lion King franchise
universe. Yeah.
But taking this movie as it is, as it stands as an individual unit, that's kind of where we land with Timon and Pumbaa.
So with all that said, for character development, we have given The Lion King 16.25 out of 20. Moving into our theming, we're going to be looking at the sub-criterions such as setting, dialogue, costuming, and then the culture, society, and rules, how well they're followed. So moving into setting, I would say very strongly that it is hard to associate these stills from any other image or from any other movie other than The Lion King. I think it is so unique and it is so place-worthy in the mind that you really can't mistake it for anything else.
Oh, 100%. I think that there's not just no other Disney movie, there's no other animated movie from any major studio that this could be confused for, because it is so iconic and such a rich landscape that they create throughout the film.
Yeah, moving into dialogue, I think we get just a smidge murky on this one, because we do get some Swahili dialogue. We get Hakuna Matata, which I believe is also Swahili. So we do get some of those instances of African language and dialogue, which is really nice.
Yeah, but we also have some things that kind of stick out like sore thumbs in terms of being in Africa. All of the actors keep their accents, so all of the Americans still sound American. Rowan Atkinson, who voices Zazu, and Jeremy Irons, who voices Scar, both keep their British accents. And so Mufasa and Scar being brothers and having different accents is a little strange.
Yeah, it's a little incongruous when you're thinking about lions.
Definitely.
You know, we can't just pawn it off on one of them went to boarding school.
I mean, it certainly fits Scar's personality for him to be, snarky and British and dry humor, but world building wise, it doesn't really make sense.
Agreed. It like I said, it's a little murky. It's not like way out of left field, but there's a little bit to pick at. And then moving into costuming, luckily there are no actual costumes in this movie, so it was easy to say, okay, well, there's nothing glaringly wrong. One thing that we can talk about, though, is lions and their coats and their fur, because the lions, for the most part, have a similar coloring, except for Scar.
Yeah, Scar being darker colored as the bad guy makes it easier for him to blend in the dark, as he's, emanating from the shadows, makes him a more sinister presence. And then, of course, Simba's coloring as he grows up, becoming identical to Mufasa. It's not just symbolic, it's also a plot point. His mom thinks it's him at first. It thinks it's Mufasa and not Simba when he first approaches.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's a nice touch, because you can show how close Simba and Mufasa were in their actual looks, as well as, being father and son. And then moving into our culture, society, and rules, we also get a little bit murky on this one because Rafiki knows Kung Fu.
Yeah, I mean, he's the most traditionally African character in the film, so I don't really understand why they chose Kung Fu for his fighting style in the final climax instead of some kind of animalistic baboon type fighting or an African fighting style of some kind. Why that choice was made, I'm not 100% sure. He is, sort of a sensei type to Simba, but at the same time, wrong part of the world.
Agreed. And then we also have a really quick moment in the climax of Timon and Pumbaa doing the hula, and that's Hawaiian and South Pacific, so a little out of place. And then Zazu singing It's a Small World to annoy Scar in the second act. Meta.
Cracks me up.
Super meta.
Cracks me up, but is not congruous with this world that has been built. It's a Small World should not exist in this world.
Correct. And I think that, we're allowed to be nitpicky on the podcast, because when we're talking about the culture, society, and rules, everything else is so clean and so easily believable for this film, but there are a couple moments that are just absolute head scratchers. So for theming, we've elected to give Lion King 13 out of 15. Moving into cinematography, we're going to be looking at our sub-criterions such as storytelling power frame by frame, character development frame by frame, and then overall beauty and creativity of the shots. And when we start with storytelling power frame by frame, the all-important sub-criteria of this one is going to be our montage count. And thankfully, Lion King does not have very many, although we do have one glaringly obvious one, which is the entire Hakuna Matata sequence.
Yeah, and it's not even like we get a montage of like Simba growing up over various different scenes. It's them walking across that log over the waterfall. 1 second he's a little kid, and then all of a sudden he's an adult. And you're like, oh, that was fast.
Yeah, so montage. It's all right. It's not the end of the world, but, you know, pretty obvious. And then the one that we kind of are like, it might be half a montage is going to be the moment when Simba is returning back to Pride Rock. You see him running back. It symbolizes a passage of time, but it's not like a stitched together or covers an extremely long passage of time. So it's like half a montage. It's in that kind of sort of category.
I think, though, that there are lots of strong visual storytelling moments to kind of make up for the fact that we get such a glaringly obvious montage. I think one moment that really I appreciated a lot was that logically, Scar makes a very smart tactical decision in that he picks a point in the cliff, in the gorge, that only the audience and Mufasa can see him. Only the audience knows what happened. Simba can't see him. Zazu's gone to go get help. Like, it's completely unknown to anyone except for those of us watching the film that Scar pushes him.
Yeah, and I love that they emphasize that you see that it's kind of like a secret that Scar is doing this out in the open, but really concealed from anybody else. I really like that. And then the other major visual storytelling moment that I like is Simba and Nala recognizing each other, because they don't necessarily get it from the way that each other looks, but more in the way of their fighting / play style from when they were kids. When they're tussling around, that's when they actually recognize each other.
I think that's so cute.
Yeah, it's adorable. I do like that this film overall does do a lot of equitable showing and telling, since we get, bits of African culture and quote unquote lion culture in this film, and we see how that interacts with the actual plot rather than just saying, okay, well, here's, how lions inherit their thrones, and here's how lions interact with, the great circle of life. It's not like really spoon-fed to you as an audience member. It's this nice blend of some information via the dialogue and then some of it that you just actually see in real life.
Yeah, I think the biggest, dialogue exposition dump we get is Mufasa and Simba looking out on the kingdom, because that's when he kind of teaches Simba those quintessential lessons, but they make sense within the story because he is teaching Simba these lessons that he needs to know in order to be king, and B, that's the only time they're said out loud, and then they're reinforced several times visually on screen through the actions of the characters and the way that they interact.
Agreed. I think my favorite moment is probably the visual storytelling we get with the circle of life conversation that Mufasa and Simba have. And Simba's like, yeah, but we eat the antelope. Like, what's so great about it? We eat the antelope. We're at the top of the food chain, but Mufasa goes, yes, but when we die, our bodies become the grass and the antelope eat the grass. And, you have antelope in the scene and you can kind of visualize where that's going. And I really like that. And then you also get the wind in certain in certain moments in this movie that kind of signify that your ancestors and the animals that came before you are always there, even if they're not physically there with you, in a really subtle way. It reminds you that your past is with you.
Yes, in the same way that every time that the idea of destiny is brought up, that this land kind of plays in the background, or at least snippets of it. Every time that Simba's ancestors or past are brought up, you see this like little circle of leaves blow through the wind, and it's a little bit mystical and a little bit magical almost, but I dig it. I think it's a really cool visual representation of kind of that chill that you get when Simba looks up at the stars and thinks of all of his ancestors up there in the sky.
Yeah, it's similar to that feeling we get in Pocahontas with Colors of the Wind, because you have that nature and that history all around you. So it's that same type of connotation, but in Lion King standard.
And then I also really like, while we're talking about symbolism, as soon as Scar is defeated and Simba takes his place next to Nala and his mother on Pride Rock, it begins to rain. And rain traditionally is a symbol of renewal and of new growth wherever it falls. And the Pride Lands in that moment certainly need some new growth because they're looking rough.
Yeah, I like that there is that symbolism of flushing out the old and then bringing in that new growth. It's a really beautiful moment to signify that new leaf that's being turned, that destiny is being restored, everything is going back to the way things were.
Yeah, it's not just the pride itself that needs renewing, it's the physical land which has come to reflect the way that the pride has suffered under Scar.
Mm-hmm. Moving into character development frame by frame, I think The Lion King has some of the best character development frame by frame that we've definitely talked about thus far. And we got to start with Mufasa, because
Mufasa,
even hearing the name, I shudder. He's always seen as that large and intimidating figure until, obviously, his very untimely death. Even in the stars in the afterlife, he takes up so much area in the sky. And really, the only time that you see him not as the large and intimidating feature is at death's door, when Scar has him hanging for his life. That's really the only time that you see him vulnerable. And you see him at that precipice and seeing his persona shift a little bit. You know, we'd already seen from him that he wasn't unwilling to say that he was afraid when his son was in danger. You know, we see that softer side of him, but he is still a large figure, an imposing figure, a figure of importance. So seeing that one shift during the stampede is very stark, very much a stark contrast to how he's represented normally.
Definitely. In that moment, he is at Scar's mercy. And that's not something you would typically think of when you think of Mufasa.
Yeah, definitely not.
Speaking of Mufasa and his large, intimidating presence, you get a moment where he and Simba are together, and Simba walks behind him and he steps into his father's footprint, and the camera pauses on that shot for a second. And you really see just how much smaller Simba is in that moment. And it really symbolizes the challenge that Simba faces of stepping into Mufasa's shoes later in the movie. It shows the literal place that he has to fill and the pressure he begins to feel as being next in line.
It's so good. It's so powerful. I love it. And then obviously on my soapbox in the music category, I put the cart before the horse just a little bit, talking about Scar, but I mean, we get character development frame by frame from him all the time. So everything that I said in music, just go ahead and repeat right here, talking about all of the theming that we get around him. I mean, it's really everything we get about him always being dark, always having dark moments with him, all of the theming that goes on in Be Prepared. I mean, of course, quid pro quo, you're expected to take certain duties on board, like dun, 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 super intimidating, super sinister. And I love all the character development we get for him.
Same. And then speaking of that kind of scene with Be Prepared, the hyenas, visually, they're represented really well in terms of their place in the circle of life. They're always kind of hanging back in the shadows. And when they rise from the background. They take over the Pride Lands from the shadows and kind of swarm in as a mob to prey on the unsuspecting.
Yeah, such a good visual representation, because that's not where hyenas normally are in that circle of life. They are, dangling at the bottom of the food chain, like Shenzi and Banzai say earlier in the film. So for them to take over as, one of the dominant forces coming out of the shadows and from the bottom of the food chain is really strong. The animators did a really good job of showing that visually rather than just saying, okay, hyenas are coming to take their place,
And it's a clear upsetting of the natural circle of life, and thus indicates how things are thrown so far out of balance by the time Simba returns.
Agreed. So well done. And then, of course, we could gush all day about the beauty and creativity frame by frame, but we're going to pick out just a few key elements, and then we're going to tell you, go watch the movie again, because you'll understand, we could talk about the entire movie.
Basically. I mean, the entire opening sequence, all of Circle of Life, there's so many different angles. You get wide shots of the vast landscapes throughout the savannah. You get close-ups of these individual animals and their hooves and their beaks and their wings, and all of Circle of Life is just so good.
Yeah, I actually really love the moment in Circle of Life where you're underneath the elephants. Mm-hmm. And you can see all the smaller animals that are scurrying around underneath them as the elephants are stomping through, because they're so much larger than most of the other animals around. I love that moment. I think it's a really nice use of cinematography in general.
I also love the sweeping angle when we finally catch Zazu in frame, and then the camera follows him, and they reveal Pride Rock, and he soars up to the top and goes to meet Simba and Rafiki. And that dynamic shot of those various different angles as the camera goes and follows Zazu is so much like a real camera. It is so well done.
Yeah, what they do in the span of just a few minutes with that opening sequence is really spectacular.
Chef's kiss.
And then, of course, I will talk about Be Prepared being such a drastic tonal shift. I'm not going to get off my soapbox. I'm not sorry about it. It's just so good because the color scheme changes. You get that change in the music. You get a little bit of everything, and you can tell that it goes to those greens and those dark grays in that actual sequence. And then the geysers coming up and their shades of green as well at the beginning. I mean, come on. What more could you possibly ask for?
Yeah, that song and the way that it's animated is pretty much perfect. No complaints. Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole Stampede sequence is also really strong. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but that was a brand new idea for animation to do something like that, especially with the way that they have to animate Mufasa and Simba through the repeated visual of the wildebeest.
Yeah, and not to take away from the actual Stampede animation, which is wonderful and terrifying, but the close-up of Simba at the beginning of the Stampede, when he realizes that all those wildebeest are coming towards him, is just such a great moment. Because you see the real fear in his eyes, oh my gosh, I caused this with one roar. And now there's all these wildebeest heading toward me, and the way that they can pan into him real fast is just so good. So for cinematography, we have given Lion King 9.5 out of 10. Let's go ahead and move into our popularity category, where we talk about things such as the reviews, the box office success, and of course, continued usage. And starting off with reviews, we've got some good ones here.
93% on Rotten Tomatoes, 88 on Metacritic, and CinemaScore gave it an A+, which is very rare. Their scale technically only goes up to A.
We see you breaking rules over there. We see you. We like it. And then, of course, Roger Ebert had his review. He said, "The saga of Simba, which in its deeply buried origins owes something to Greek tragedy and certainty to Hamlet, is a learning experience as well as an entertainment." And yeah, I agree with that.
Same. Real Views, which would have been probably a more recent review of this, considering it's a website and bloggers were not as big of a thing back in 1994, says that with each new animated release, Disney seems to be expanding its already broad horizons a little more. The Lion King is the most mature, in more than one sense, of these films, and there has clearly been a conscious effort to please adults as much as children. Happily, for those of us who generally stay far away from cartoons, they have succeeded.
And I think that the broad appeal of Lion King to all audiences helps contribute to its overall success, because it's not, needlessly pandering to children or adults. It is a broad storyline that everybody can get on board with and enjoy.
And you enjoy it differently at different ages. It kind of meets you wherever you are.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a thinker when you get older, because you can relate to some of the more mature or serious themes, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. And then we have this one from TV Guide. The Lion King was technically proficient and entertaining, but it offers a less memorable song score than did the previous hits, and a hasty, unsatisfying dramatic resolution. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, that didn't age well. That's just like a really bad take. Just didn't age well at all.
Don't understand at all.
I mean, you can subjectively not like this film. That's totally fine. That's your prerogative. But a less memorable song score? I'm sorry, what?
As we spoke about in the music section, Elton John literally turned these into pop hits and earned awards for them too, completely outside of the movie. Like, how? No.
Don't get me wrong. We did gush about The Little Mermaid's music, and when we do get to Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, I will have plenty of positive things to say about that as well. But to say that this doesn't hold up to those previous films is just
objectively false.
Misguided at best. Yeah, just wrong. You're wrong. I'm sorry. But yeah.
I'm not sorry.
And then when we move into the box office, we can show how wrong the TV Guide really was, because this movie earned $763.4 million in its initial theatrical release on a $45 million budget.
Talk about blowing the roof off of any record that Disney had ever previously had. It stood for over a decade, I think almost 2 decades, in terms of being the highest grossing animated film ever.
Yeah, it held that record for quite some time, taken over by the some of our revival movies. And it ended up grossing almost $1 billion total. So, I mean, we're looking at just stupid numbers.
Stupid. And honestly, I don't know if that 988.6 million includes any re-releases that they've done or plan to do in COVID. So, like, who knows? Maybe it will cross $1 billion this year.
This thing's just a moneymaker. This definitely doesn't include, Lion King 2, Lion King 1.5, all of the continued usage that we'll talk about. This is just Lion King.
Just the one movie.
And I did speak to my dad, who was a huge Disney fan then and still is now, and his belief, and it's pretty strong to say based off of the evidence, is that Lion King was a really good indication to many people that Disney was there to stay. They didn't have just a couple lucky hits with Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. It showed the industry that Disney was able to consistently put out hit after hit and not take any pauses.
Yeah, and I think the saying is, 1's a fluke, 2's a coincidence, 3's a pattern. 4, that begins a dynasty.
Yeah, that's staying power right there.
Yeah.
And then because of all of this success in the box office and all the good reviews, we have plenty to say about the continued usage for this film.
Oh boy. So, starting off with presence in the parks, Disney's Animal Kingdom heavily features this film. They have an entire land featuring Lion King and Lion King characters, Rafiki's Planet Watch. And they also have the longest running show on property before it was canceled ? Its status is still up in the air, but all of its cast have been laid off due to COVID. But up until this year, it was the longest standing show on Disney property at any Disney park.
Yeah, Festival of the Lion King is currently on an indefinite hiatus due to COVID. However, it is one of the most beloved shows on Disney property, the longest running show in any of the theme parks. I think the only one that defeats it on property for longevity might be Hoop-Dee-Hoo Review at Fort Wilderness. But it is one of the longest standing And we'll definitely be back one day. I have no doubt that Disney will bring that one back.
I have faith.
And then, of course, The Lion King was brought into a Broadway adaptation, the second that Disney decided to put on The Great White Way. And it is still running as of March of 2020. Obviously, Broadway has been dark until at least May of 2021. But there have been no announcements to take Lion King off of Broadway at this point. So when the restart happens on Broadway, we fully expect to see Lion King once again. And it is one of the longest running of all time and one of the most profitable shows of all time. And the only ones that beat it are beloved classics like Phantom of the Opera. I think Cats beats it for profitability. Very few have it beat in dollars, but it is very well loved in the Broadway community.
Indeed. There's also been a whole slew of TV shows and direct-to-video or streaming films spun off from this. Timon and Pumbaa got their own animated show in the 90s that was a favorite of mine on Toon Disney. We also got, in the more modern era, The Lion Guard, which is a kids' TV show on the Disney Channel featuring Simba's son, Kion. And then you also got two direct-to-video sequels, Lion King 2 and Lion King 1.5, which we briefly mentioned earlier, that actually features Timon and Pumbaa as the main characters.
And Lion King 2 has one of the best songs of all time that Disney's ever created that is actually in the Broadway show called He Lives in You. And amazing, epic. If you haven't already, please listen to the Broadway cast recording of The Lion King. It will change your life.
It will indeed.
And then also, most recently, we did have a live action remake that did do pretty well in box offices and is also available on Disney Plus. And then there was also a documentary of sorts,
sort of a celebration of African culture and the way that it has influenced contemporary Black culture, called Black is King, conceived and directed by Beyonce and starred in by Beyonce and several other big Black Hollywood actors.
So that you should definitely catch on Disney Plus. And then if you are an old school gamer or love the classics for, nostalgia purposes, there were 2 video games that were released on the SNES and the Sega, as well as a couple computer games. So Disney Interactive definitely staked their claim for this one. There is actually a remake of the SNES and Sega games for the Nintendo Switch. And gosh, that game is just as hard as I remember it being as a kid. I am terrible at it, but man, I have so much fun. You can do the Lion King version or the Aladdin version from the original releases on the Switch, and that is a nostalgia bomb, and it is lovely.
And if you are a subscribing member of our Ko-fi membership, you guys may get a chance here in the next month or two to see our producers, Kevin and Steven, play one of those games. But you'll have to sign up for the membership to find out how. Shameless plug.
We're big gamers around here. I'm a terrible gamer, but I have so much fun doing it. Our pro gamers are behind the microphone and behind the camera rather than in front of it for the most part. And they're very much looking forward to showing off those gamer skills. And then, of course, if you do happen to play Kingdom Hearts, you do get quite a few recurring characters and recurring appearances by many different members of the Lion King clan. So for popularity, we had no choice but to give a perfect 5 out of 5 for this category score. Moving into our impact on Hollywood category, let's go ahead and take a look at the accolades, innovations, and precedents. And for accolades, this is an easy W because it did win Oscars for Best Original Score and Best Original Song. And it was actually against itself in Best Original Song. Can You Feel the Love Tonight and Circle of Life were both nominated, so major props there.
And Hakuna Matata.
Oh yeah, and Hakuna Matata was up there too. So it was up against itself 3 times and still managed to pull out the W. So, that's a big time win right there.
Oh yeah. And I mean, when you have juggernauts like Hans Zimmer behind the score and Elton John behind the songs, like, there's no question it's going to be quality. They're going to get awards.
Yeah, you're a crazy person if you didn't think that was going to win some awards. And then moving into innovations, this was the first and only Disney movie to be dubbed in Zulu. Usually the only African language that does get dubbed is Arabic. So it was nice to have an additional African language represented for a full dub.
For an African film. Yeah, that's appropriate. I wish there were more Disney movies dubbed into more African languages, but...
Agreed. I think we're seeing Disney move in the right direction with the additional amounts of dubs that we're getting, you know, especially in this modern revival with Frozen and Frozen 2 especially. We saw it translated into so many different languages.
I think it was like 40 plus.
Yeah, rather than just subtitles. So I think that they're moving in the right direction, which is nice. Always, I would love to see that move a little faster, but, you know. Visible forward progress counts.
And then we also briefly mentioned this in cinematography. The Wildebeest Stampede was the first attempt to do anything like that of its kind on screen. That kind of motion from far away, it all looks repeated and very similar, but then when they zoom in on the wildebeest, each of them is individually animated. They move independently of each other, and that kind of time-consuming effort and concerted effort that needed to be made among so many different animators had to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, they pulled out the muscle on this one. You could definitely tell the amount of work that they put into it. And then, of course, moving into precedence, this was the highest grossing Disney film and animated film for quite some time. They held that record for almost 20 years when it came to animation. And I believe it was Frozen, the first Frozen that finally took it down. So it is definitely a profitable franchise for Disney.
Oh, yes.
So for impact on Hollywood, we've elected to give 3 out of 5 points for this subcategory. Finally, our last category is going to be our bonus category, which is quotability. And we are going to be looking at the iconicity of the writing in this, and then writing with wit and humor, and how much we enjoy the writing overall. And for iconicity, I mean, so many. And it even starts with the circle of life.
Yeah, absolutely. The concept of the circle of life and the entrance of it into modern vernacular, I think, can almost be attributed to this film.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we also have things like remember who you are. Nobody is like, oh man, I don't know if that's going to be a memorable line when I leave this movie theater. Like, no, that's an important one. That's an important one. You remembered it.
It's also James Earl Jones, so like it's hard to forget that booming sound.
Yeah.
Also, the king has returned is one of my favorite moments. It's a simple line from Rafiki, and he doesn't deliver it with any special drama about him, but says it almost matter-of-factly.
And I think that's the beauty of most of these quotable moments, is that there isn't a whole lot of flair. There isn't a whole lot of pomp and circumstance with them. Like, they're just memorable lines. They're iconic. Another one that I really like is slimy yet satisfying.
And that kind of brings us into the whole meme culture and the various different ones that Lion King has spawned. I'm surrounded by idiots is my personal favorite, and I use it many times a year.
They used to sell that on shirts, and I relate to that so hard. I love it. And then also another one of my favorite one that I have seen memed previously is no king, la 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 la. It's all the hyenas dancing around each other. I love that.
It's so good.
And then, of course, the writing in general. Timon and Pumbaa. Period.
Like, and almost anything that came out of their mouths, you just couldn't help but cackle laughing, because Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella together are just hilarious.
The monkey's his uncle?
I really like the bowling for buzzards line when they first start encountering Simba, and how they almost bring that idea back when they go into the fight against the hyenas, where Pumbaa basically bowls for hyenas.
Yeah, I like seeing it brought forward full circle. That was really nice because it was hysterical when they were bowling for buzzards, and then it actually had a purpose when they were bowling for hyenas. So clever.
Complete with sound effect.
Yeah, sound effects and everything. And then Scar's whole first dialogue with Mufasa after the opening card is so smartly written. You know, we talked about all of that backstory that we get for Scar and the tension that he has with Mufasa. It's because of that opening sequence. It's, you know, him playing with his food, with the mice, and it is, you know, talking about Mufasa got the lion's share of the brute strength. And when it came to the brains of the bunch, Scar got the lion's share. So it's really nice to see all of that writing at the very beginning. That is a really tete-a-tete between Scar and Mufasa.
Yeah, their banters. It seems so natural between them. You imagine they've been doing this since they were very young.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, most of Scar's dialogue is just really good. His "Long live the king" moment before he flings Mufasa off the side of the gorge is just a dramatic irony at its finest.
Yeah, I love it. And then I think that this is also the moment where we give mega props to just the voice acting in general.
Oh my God.
We've done it for a couple of other movies where the voice acting is just so iconic and so memorable. Everybody in this entire cast deserves huge praise for what the work that they've done.
Didn't know, quick factoids. Adult Simba's voiced by Matthew Broderick, a.k.a. Inspector Gadget, a.k.a. the star of The Producers, aka many other things because he's a star. And then Nala, for those of you who are West Wing fans like we are, is played by Moira Kelly, who is Mandy in the first season of West Wing.
Yeah, lots of big names to be had, and they really knocked it out of the park.
Absolutely.
So for quotability, we've elected to give The Lion King 3.75 out of 5.
Now, one thing we love doing is getting feedback from our listeners. We've taken on this quest not just for ourselves, but for you. So your thoughts and opinions are very important to us. Here's what some of you had to say about The Lion King. We had our friend Lindsay at LinzMFree on Twitter join us for our hashtag DDP Watch Night, and she had some feelings about this movie. The sequence where Simba is trying to wake Mufasa after the stampede, she called it literally the saddest moment in Disney movie history, 4 crying emojis. And I'm pretty sure that was all of us in that moment.
Yeah, no matter how many times I see it.
And then she also pinpointed actually a cinematography moment we did not pick out. The fire and smoke in the fight scene between Simba and Scar at the end of the film. She said it's done so well, and I completely agree, especially with the gif she included.
Yeah, that final sequence is so good.
It's lit really, really well and gives that heightened dramatic feel to it for sure. Mm-hmm. We also had some thoughts shared with us from Nicole's dad, Nick. He contributed several notes and also came up with several of the same things that we have talked about throughout the film. But he said, Timon and Pumbaa provide the best comedic relief in an otherwise somber story. And I think that is 100% true. I would say they are the gold standard for comedic relief in terms of Disney movies.
Yeah, they really are some of the best sidekicks that you'll find in the canon.
Definitely. And then our friend Brittany on Facebook was watching Lion King with her little one and was yelling out Lion King quotes to embarrass her. Not the birdie boiler! Athena sighs. Yeah, Mufasa's boy! Athena gives me dirty look. Look harder. Athena whines. Sarabi! Athena leaves the entire room. They call me Mr. Pig. Athena comes back and smiles at me. So clearly this child's favorite is gonna be Pumbaa, which, like, A+ choice, kiddo. We also got to hear from Captain Wolvie on Discord, and he said, I know it's beloved. I know it's, like, the most celebrated, and I liked it when I first saw those birds in the trailer and couldn't quite tell if it was real or animated. It was awesome. The light Hakuna Matata holds up. The voice of James Earl Jones anchors the gravitas of the premise, and Jeremy Irons' sniveling is a perfect counterpoint. Almost enough to cut through that baritone source of the Force. By itself, it's great. Compared to some newer films, it shows its age. especially the overbearing soundtrack.
And maybe I like it because it's overbearing.
I wouldn't exactly call the soundtrack overbearing. I will admit that in some places it does show its age, particularly in respect to some of the animation. But when you look at what it was doing for the time, it was groundbreaking, as we've previously discussed. And all the points about the voice acting are 100% spot on. I think using James Earl Jones and Jeremy Irons as foils for each other in Mufasa and Scar was a stroke of genius by the casting director. And just a quick reminder for anybody who hasn't gotten it yet, the Score Along Guide is one of the many things you will get from us if you join our Ohana. So you can go to our website, definingdisneypodcast.com. There's a great little button up top that says join our Ohana. You can also click the link that's in our show notes every week. And if you put in your email, we will send to you the Score Along Guide, which will help you score any movie, but a Disney movie along with us, down to every single sub-criteria that we talk about on the show. It'll also get you several other cool things.
Now, we do want to throw out a general disclaimer that just because a movie gets a certain rating doesn't mean you must or must not love it. Feelings are subjective, and Disney movies are successful because they play on feelings. They're nostalgic and emotional, and that's not a bad thing. And thankfully, I get to talk to you about why I subjectively love The Lion King. As you heard a few minutes ago, my dad is an avid listener, and I love the support that he provides and the commentary that he provides for us. But Lion King is definitely one of his favorites. And it's one of my favorite memories is driving to school in the morning when I was really young, 5, 6 years old, going to school and listening to cassette tapes of movies like The Lion King. And it wasn't just listening and singing to every line. It was quoting all of those memorable quotes in between the songs and knowing every beat and every pause and every inflection. And partly that's because of him. And I strongly associate this movie with my family because it is such a great film. And he's right. It's definitely a somber movie. There are definitely moments that make you pause and there are a lot of strong feelings, but I love the overall story. I think the music is spectacular. As I've grown up, I've come to love that cinematography more and more. And I love the overall story of knowing your destiny and taking your place in the great circle of life. And my family will always talk about the great circle of life and how that impacts you as a person. And I will always hold that near and dear. This movie came out when I was very young, but it's one of the first movies that I remember having memories of. And it will always hold a special place in my heart because of that. Now, with all that being said, the goal of our experiment is to be as objective as possible. So using the categories and criteria that we've created, our final score is 91.5%, which will now take first place.
I think rightfully so.
And I think rightfully so. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you liked what you've heard, we have been the Defining Disney Podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating, a great review, and don't forget to subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, run. Run away and never return. In our next episode, we'll be staying in the natural world as we go back in time with Brother Bear on January 27th. Don't forget to check out our website, which is definingdisneypodcast.com, and make sure to join our Ohana. That's the only way to get our free sneak peek calendar, so you make sure to never miss an episode. Bye-bye!
Bye!